So let's talk about integrating quotes. I know most of you are thinking, this is not my first research paper and I know how to integrate quotes. But I want you to hang tight and follow through in this tutorial so we can talk about how to integrate quotes in a more sophisticated manner in order to elevate your writing to the next level. Now, this is pertaining specifically to your definition paper. This is not a narrative, so you're not just saying, here's what I think, here's what I feel, here's whatever, with just kind of a narrative quality. You're actually writing a research paper, and your research paper is to define this term or this word using evidence, saying what it's not, saying what it is, and using examples of that from media, from journals, from interviews, and things along those lines. So we quote in order to give credit where credit is due. And we are using this author-specific words when we're quoting in quotation marks. If it's not their specific words, then we are summarizing or paraphrasing what they said. We still need to cite it, but it's not a direct quote. So you definitely need to say who said it, what's the context, what does it actually mean, and how does it support your thesis and or supporting argument. The main mistakes that I see students making, and the first is quoting too little. And this means that either you're kind of going back to relying on more of a narrative structure, that you are trying to over summarize and paraphrase and not really going back to the original text and finding those nuggets that, the kind of the money quote more or less to go in there. Because while summarizing and paraphrasing is great, there are times where you want the actual data in there, the actual quote. The other one I see is overquoting. So every other line is a quote. The typical amount will be 1, maybe 2 quotes per paragraph. And when we're talking about block quotes, those are long quotes, maybe 1, maybe 2 per paper. Okay, if you have lots of block quotes, it means that you can do some summarizing and paraphrasing. The final thing, and this is really where most students fall, is assuming that the quotes speak for themselves. So you're just kind of dropping, we call this kind of drive-by quoting, you're just kind of dropping quotes into your paper. What that does, though, is that leaves room for interpretation. Your job as a writer is to write for the reader. You want to leave as little room for misinterpretation as possible. So if you were to drop a quote in and not back up what you want me, the reader, to get out of it, I can get a million things of which you never intended for me to get out of it. So one way is that you want to frame your quotes. Quotes should not end a paragraph. There should always be one more sentence explaining that quote and how it fits into your argument. So here we see an example of 1, it's not framed, but 2, that is just kind of at the end of your paragraph. So this is what I like to call a drop-by quoting here. What you should be doing is introducing the quote, setting it up, creating the context, stating who said it, or what it's in reference to. Then you have the quote, and then you have that follow-up statement explaining why it's important, why you have it in your paper, how it relates, how you're refuting it, whatever that may be for you. So an example here is this quote. So I'm going to talk a lot about sandwiching a quote. You'll have a sentence that's kind of setting it up. You then pull it in, and then you quote, and then you talk about it. So for this quote, Betsy Taylor's use of colorful language reveals that she has a nostalgic view of American society and does not understand economic realities. So I'm setting this up. In her first paragraph, Taylor refers to a big box store as, quote, 25-acre slab of concrete with a 100,000 square foot box of stuff that lands on a town, evoking images of a monolithic monster crushing the American way of life, end quote. Then I have my explanation, but her assessment oversimplifies a complex issue. Now I've added that explanation, and from here on out I'm going to talk about how it's oversimplifying this complex issue. Okay? So there's several things about formatting quotes. There's parenthetical citations. When you are alluding to something that someone else has written, you're summarizing, you're paraphrasing it, you still need to cite it. Here in this first example, we can see that Menard is using social weapon in a certain way, and we are using that term in that way. So we want to make sure that that's in quotes, and then we're going to cite it. I talk a little bit about this on the APA slideshow, but when we have exclamation marks and question marks, which typically are not often in academic papers, but you may have them in yours, if you are making a statement and there's a question within that statement, it becomes complicated. So here we have Menard, 2009, acknowledges that modern English usage is a, quote, classic of the modern language. And this is still the sentence that you're making, but he's asking, is it a dead language? That question mark goes inside the quotation because he's asking that question, but you're making a statement, so there's going to be a period at the end of your statement. A little confusing. You might need to rewind and listen to that again. But because they're asking a question, but you're making a statement. So there's a question mark for their question that's within your statement. Ellipses is when you have a block quote, but there's a lot of stuff in the middle that you don't need. You take out all that stuff in the middle and mark it by the 3 periods. It's a period, space, period, space, period. So for block quotes, it's any quote that is over 40 words. That's typically 4 lines. I do count, so make sure that if you're approaching the 3-4 line mark that you're actually counting the words that you have. It should be double indented, and you're going to notice that the setting up, the actual format is different. So here for APA, you have Jones and the date, study found the following, and then you have your quote. There's no quotation marks around it. The punctuation actually goes before the page number. So this is really different than what you might do in a regular quote in a sentence. So my argument is when in doubt, cite it out. As far as quoting, make sure that you are sandwiching your quotes. You have the lead-in, you have the quote, and you have the explanation. It becomes really important, especially as we're working on these definitions and clarity and writing for the reader. Here's a template. I got this out of They Say, I Say. There's a ton of templates out there. I encourage you not to just he says, she says. But, you know, do they state this? Do they exclaim this? Do they argue? Do they advocate? Is it their view? What's the actual verb that you want to use for what they are doing? All right. Happy writing.